Alrighty, we are back with the second installment of the Modern Coach series here. I've got Marcus Martinez, I've got John Wolf, two OGs, longtime friends, well before I knew either of them. An honor to be moderating a conversation between you two, an interview for you, Marcus. I'm not really sure which. We'll see where it goes. We're new to this whole thing. But in any case, it's a pleasure to have you on. You've got a ton of experience. You and I have talked a bunch over the last couple months. You've shared a lot of that experience with me, what you've done as a coach, as a content creator, as a mentor, and I think it will be super, super useful for folks who are tuning in. So I think without further ado, we should probably just dive into it, if that's cool with you guys. Yeah?
Absolutely.
Sweet. So I think the place I want to start with this is, if I look back, call it 10, 15 years ago, in the Wild West, the early days of social media, Marcus, you were one of the first movers, I would say, to go out and build an audience around a relatively niche skill set and then watch, basically get mass adoption with that. John, honestly, you followed a similar vein, so you can definitely chime in here as well. But I think, you did that, Marcus, and then you were also, a few years later, one of the first movers in the direct monetization of your content, creating products that people could buy directly from you. I think in both cases, you were ahead of the curve of something that's now just the standard, the norm. If you could speak a little bit to your process, both for finding opportunities, maybe a little bit ahead of the pack, and then knowing when to lean into those things, and tell some of that story, what those early years were like, and how you scaled up from there. I think that'd be an awesome place to start this thing off.
Man, that just saying all those things just brings me back 15 plus years ago. And I can remember the conversations with my business partner at the time who, I'll give credit where credit's due. He got me on to we got to make DVDs. We got to put programs out there. Putting things on YouTube. So it was, because it was such a niche thing, kettlebells, nobody was talking about kettlebells. And John, you know what I'm talking about. It was people would see them and it wasn't now people at least say kettlebells, but then there was nothing. It was what the heck is that thing? So after realizing there was something unique there, and it was okay, let's just put stuff out there. Let's see what we can put, because one of the main things for me was, it wasn't like what it is now, where if I want to search kettlebell swing, you'll have a billion videos of kettlebell swings. There was one chopped up video from the one DVD that you could find at the time. And even that didn't really have a lot of information there. So it was just out of necessity. It was well, I want to be able to learn these things. So I want to be able to help other people now learn these things. And like I said, my business partner at the time, he was really good about, let's just put content out there. Let's try to reach the masses. Let's put stuff on YouTube. So we were putting stuff on YouTube in freaking late 2008, early 2009. And it was, like I said, it was the Wild West. There was, there was nothing out there, but it was so cool to connect with people all over the world with this thing that I thought nobody really used. And so it was really fun. But I would say the process of putting the content there was unique in that there was no template. There was no this is how you should put it together. This is how you should do it. It was let's just, what do you know? Let's make some videos. Let's put some content. So it was a lot of trial, a lot more error. And, most of the time it was pretty fun. Sometimes it was a little stressful, but it was definitely, it was a wild time.
Would you say that you had a good set, was it easy to know that you had traction in those early days, or was that a challenge? And kind of how did you parse that? Because I know for coaches who are building things now, that can be really, really tricky. It's I launched these 3 things. I don't really know which one is working. I have a gut feeling. But yes, what was that like?
Really, when we were putting stuff on YouTube, the only feedback we would get would be comments. We would get the likes, and we would see, is this hitting? Are people actually, using this information? And pretty early on, we were getting, a mixed bag. We were just like it is today. It's oh, what the heck is this? This looks useless. This is dumb. And then the people who have tried it, they're oh, that's awesome. Or the people who are at least open to it.
Yeah.
So we were kind of using that feedback to be able to do a little bit more and try different things. So that was kind of the main way at first. But then it was more just, that was the vision. I knew that there was something here. I knew that this was going to become more mainstream. And that was my vision back in 2008. It was, let's make a kettlebell specifically, but all kinds of unconventional training mainstream. I want to see it in every gym. So with that kind of vision, that's led me throughout the years, regardless of what the feedback was, regardless of what I was really seeing, it just helped me kind of keep creating new things, trying new things, and then finding the right person for this stuff. So rather than, even though I wanted to make it mainstream, rather than trying to make it for everyone, it was make it as accessible as possible.
I'm like, go ahead, John.
No, I was going to say, when you guys started out in putting out that content, I remember, I was in, I guess, Central California, kind of NorCal compared to you guys, at least. You're in the southern part of California, which is kind of a world apart if you're not from California. Those are two different worlds. But at the same time, it was funny because you guys had really, and back to your old business partner who I worked with in my early time on it as well, and he specialized more in that content production, right? Like putting out lots of content. And I think I saw like you guys had put together early on, before anybody else was really thinking about the exercise library resource, basically a compendium of a lot of these skills that have evolved since then. But it was really one of the earliest places you could find clubs, kettlebells, a lot of other non-traditional calisthenics. And you guys really put a lot of energy into building a library, a resource for people who really probably would never have gotten exposed to a lot of these things if not for some of those resources. And it's funny, like you said, like you put out all this stuff, and I'm sure at that time, even more so than now, people had wildly different reactions. Like you said, some people are like, this is the silliest thing I've ever seen, and fuck yeah, that's awesome. And I think one of the things that I would say just on that same tip was we were doing something similar. It was a little different because we didn't put out those same type of larger libraries of resources, but we were putting out like little hit reels out of my little studio in Salinas, California, and kind of the same reaction, right? But at the same time, you did a lot of different things and narrowed your focus to kettlebells because I think that's where the opportunity really presented itself from a market growth standpoint. But for us, it was very similar. We did a lot of different things, and we kept ourselves a little bit more diluted in the sense that we're much more multimodal continually. Can you talk a little bit about how you narrowed from more broad, unconventional training to the kettlebell?
Well, I'd say kettlebells were always the main focus, which is why when I started the gym, it was a kettlebell specific gym. And then all the other modalities kind of came, after the fact, after I learned about them. So like the maces, the clubs, like you said, the calisthenics, the suspension trainer, the rings. I liked those, but I never saw them having the same mass appeal that kettlebells had. So like I would have a group of 20 people in my class and we were doing swings and basic movements. I'm like, okay, this is accessible for most people. This is something that we can grow. The other stuff, it was like, okay, this is super, like this kettlebells are already niche. This is like super duper niche to where only a small handful of people are going to be able to have the ability to use these things. At least that was my mindset at the time. Now I see how you can scale it to any level. But I always kind of saw those as like, this is the kind of like fun projects that I really like. And then for those few people that are really into it, cool, I'll share that stuff with you. And then I just liked using it. So it was just, how can I get more proficient at this? How can I use heavier maces? How can I use heavier clubs? And I saw the benefit of that, especially with like my fighters, people who they absolutely needed that grip strength, that shoulder mobility, that shoulder strength through so many different positions. But like I said, kettlebells were always the focus. They were always going to be the focus. It was like, how can we add some more pieces based on like very specific needs?
Did somebody show you the value of a kettlebell, or were there a group of people using that tool that you really look up to that then inspired you to go out and do it? Or was it more happenstance, you tripped and fell into it and then loved it? Was there somebody you were holding up saying, I want to be like that person?
Oh, yeah. So, and John, I mean, we're going to have very parallel universe here in terms of people and names. But it was like the first time I saw a kettlebell was through Mike Mahler. And that was like, it was like an article. Dude, I don't even remember. It might have been like a physical article. Maybe it was online. He was one of the first like real online fitness guys in this world. But I saw that and I'm like, that looks interesting. And he was pretty jacked and he was like a big dude. So I'm like, okay, there's something there. And like my background was tennis and it was always like, okay, everything that I was sold on with kettlebells was like, be explosive, be lean without the mass, because I was like that idiot that was like, I don't want to get too big. So I was so focused on how can I be as explosive and lean as possible. But then I saw kettlebells. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. But it was like $250 for like a single 24K, like 53-pound kettlebell. So I was like, nah, heck no. I'm just going to use dumbbells for this. So I started using dumbbells. And then I'm like, okay, I can see that there's something different with the kettlebell. So I started digging a little bit more. That's how I found like RKC and Pavel, and then everybody that kind of stemmed from Pavel in those beginning days. So like Steve Maxwell, Steve Cotter, Jason C. Brown, all these guys where it was like, okay, this is really interesting how they're applying it. And at the time, it was like they had different kind of people who were specific in like a certain martial art or mobility or strength and power, whatever it was. But they were all kind of the umbrella of kettlebells through RKC. So once I found that, I'm like, okay, this is opening up a whole new world. And even though it was very specific on how they used it, you can see how the application was pretty broad. Like you can hit through a lot or go through a lot of different types of training. You can hit a lot of different types of people. And then the way I took it was, okay, how can I, like I said from the beginning, how can I make this more for the masses? So I still loved flow, and I mean, at the time I didn't really understand flow, but I still loved all the kind of unique things you could do with the kettlebell, but how can I make it very accessible for regular people at that point?
Yeah,
That was a really interesting time for kettlebells in the history. It was kind of like all the people who eventually created other certifications, other organizations were all under that one flag. And I remember I was at probably the second or third RKC, and it was like you said, Jeff Martone kind of was repping the tactical athlete thing, and he was building that brand, and he was kind of delivering content from that perspective. But you had Maxwell there, and he was talking about highly efficient training and doing it out of his BJJ school. You had Nate, what's his, I forget his last name. He was a para-rescue guy.
Para-rescue, yeah. Nate Green.
Yeah. yeah. And then it was like who else? Mahler was there, who was, like you said, a big old dude. I had a funny story. I remember he was presenting at a like some type of event, and I had never seen a bigger than a 32 kilo kettlebell. So he was like, "Hey, do you mind helping me grab these kettlebells from my car?" I'm like, "Cool." I was like, he grabbed his backpack, and I ended up carrying the 240 kilo kettlebells back. I'm like, dang, I'm farmer carrying your kettlebells for you, bro. I'm like I brought him to the little booth, and I was like, screw that, I earned it. I'm gonna play around with your kettlebells before you get to do that. So that was really cool. But I was like, man, all these guys, they really brought, like you said, the opportunity to see how they apply them in very different realms, and brought that kind of at that time to one little hub that was the RKC. It was really the only educational offering at the time. But what's funny was that the certification, there was this very core competency focus, right? So then it was almost like a free for all. Everybody took turns destroying everybody that was in attendance, and it was a blast. I had so much fun. I got my ass handed to me over and over and over again. I mean, we were doing things that, like, I was like, definitely outside of the educational norm. I was like, a SOTS press? I never did a SOTS press before. And I'm like, man, that's hard. Press this thing overhead from a seated position, from a low squat. But that all those contributions have been really important. And then seeing how it's diversified, how kettlebells are represented in the marketplace. But I think you hit the nail on. For you, kettlebell flow has been a big thing in your evolution. How did you find your way to kettlebell flow and really kind of make your mark there?
So it's kind of funny. There's like a few pieces to this, because it wasn't like overnight. But the first one was, I went to a workshop with Steve Maxwell. I think it was like 2010. And it was the first time I'd seen like rotational work. So I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like rotational cleans, rotational swings. Like I'd never tried anything like that. And I know in the very, very beginning, Pavel was doing a lot of things like that. But then I think as he got more into the course and making it very standardized, they focused on just like the 6 movements, and then that was it. So they stopped going to like, how can we do this kettlebell through as many different planes as possible? So seeing that kind of opened my eyes to things. And then before that, a couple pieces. One was I really liked, and I talked about this on the courses with On It, and it sounds silly to say this, but when I was using kettlebells, it was like, I remember watching Pumping Iron, which seems totally the antithesis to kettlebells. But in that first scene with Arnold and Franco, and they're with the ballet instructor, and she's like, when you're in this position and you're in this position, remember, they don't just see that, they see all the transitions between. And it was something about that like phrase that was like all the transitions between. So that means it's not just this particular movement. And I remember thinking, because it was right around the time that I was using kettlebell, like doing the like lateral stuff. It was like, how does everything connect? And then the last part, which I think is the funniest part, is a friend of mine, his dad, who's since passed away. He came to the gym with my business partner at the time, and he brought swords, and he showed us, and he was big into sword play. So he had these swords and would go through all kinds of movements, all kinds of stuff, and it just ended up being this like really fun, like you're going through movements, like stuff that you would never ever try to like write out or plan out. It was just like, let's just play and do as much as possible. So for like hours, we're like LARPing in the gym with these big ass swords. And then the next day I was in the gym and I had a pull-up bar handle, which I think I still have. And I started using it for that because I'm like, oh, that's really cool because my grip was fried, my shoulders were fried, my arms were fried. And then after that, I started just like grabbed a light kettlebell and just started kind of playing with it. I was like, okay, how many different movements can I do? So it was like all these pieces that kind of came together to, all right, this thing is so fun to use. And once you get to this level of proficiency, it's like, what else can I do with it? What else can I try with it? So then it was literally just a matter of play. It was like I was in my gym just playing as much as possible and having a freaking blast and sweating my ass off. I was like, okay, there's something here. And the first time I tried to put it into a class, I was like, all right, guys, I set the timer. I showed them what we're going to do. I was like, we're just going to flow. I put the timer on. Let's go. And they looked at me like, what the hell you mean flow? And I was like, at that point, I realized, okay, we need some like steps to get to this. Like no one is as kettlebell nerdy as I am in this. But I know when people get into this, they're going to really enjoy it. So how do we give them some parameters so that they can actually apply it to their training?
All right, Marcus, real quick here. We're going to take a brief pause after that excellent explanation. And I'm getting a notification here that your device storage is running low and that
I saw that.
it's going to stop your recording in a moment. All right, quick break, technical difficulties, we're live. So I want to draw a bridge here. You know, you're telling a story about a time in which you pursued something that you found super interesting, you dove really deep into it, and that thing, whether it happened to be or you noticed it to be, and we're talking about kettlebells here and even kettlebell flow to some degree, that thing was accessible and practical. Like there was a use for it, right? And like broadly applicable to a lot of people. So, okay, a bunch of people in the future might actually be interested in this thing. And that proved to be true, and you were able to build a business around it. Now, I said I wanted to build a bridge. We were talking about the modern coach, you know, not the 2006 coach. So what do we think those things are now? Where in the industry do you see things that seem interesting, that are potentially practical and are accessible? And I got an answer for you, Marcus, but I'll turn it over.
I mean, I always go back to, you know, methods are many, principles are few. So even though there are the same methods and we can technically add more methods with, you know, some different tools and toys and stuff, I think it's the same thing. I mean, there's still enough people out there who haven't used kettlebells at all, let alone doing any kind of creative work or double work or anything like that. I think that for sure clubs are one of those things because they're relatively accessible and you don't need to go very heavy. As far as like the next thing, I don't know. I don't really see a next thing outside of, you know, what these things are already, like the sandbags. It's all the same stuff to me. Like this is still, people are just getting introduced to these things now, you know, 15 plus years later. But I'm interested to see what your answer is, Dom.
Yeah, well, I think something funny is like you mentioned tennis earlier, and I see you playing pickleball, and I think pickleball is a great example of something similar that happened where it was like,
okay,
yeah, you wanted that one. You're, damn, why did I think of that one? Why did I think of that one?
I wish I had thought about that one.
I think the floor is yours again. I think you're doing interesting things in that space. I'd be curious to hear about it.
Yes, I have gone all in on that ridiculous sport that I thought was ridiculous until I started playing, and then absolutely fell in love with this thing. I mean, to say it's taking this nation by storm is like an understatement. Like every person I've talked to that plays it, that has any kind of, whether they have a tennis background or not, they love it. to the point where big gyms are incorporating it into their facilities, to the point where, you're seeing companies that are starting to not only put out fitness for pickleball, but also just the amount of products out there, the amount of paddles out there, the amount of people that I've talked to specifically that see me playing or see that I'm doing it and asking for fitness programs around it because they're like, oh, I just want to like be able to compete better. I want to be able to play better. So I think that, again, it's not necessarily new. It's a novel thing in that people are interested in playing this sport, that they, want to be more active. Is it different from people getting into basketball or any other sport at whatever time? I guess yes, because it's so much so fast. Like I've never seen, because I play tennis, that was my background. I've never seen so many courts transition to a different style of court so fast. I've never seen so many people, this surge of people, do this one thing where it's like, I can't go to a court and it be empty at any time. Like they're all full. So to me, the opportunity there, number one, and I only, whenever there's any kind of potential opportunity, it's because of something like I'm really interested in. I got into kettlebells and then turned it into a business because I loved it. Like it wasn't even so much that I saw an opportunity. It was like the opportunity came after I already fell in love with the thing. And now I'm kind of experiencing that with pickleball where it's like, all right, there's an opportunity here, but that's after the point where I'm like already so embedded in this thing that I'm like, there's definitely something here. So I think for sure fitness in pickleball, training in pickleball, like that's not going anywhere.
It's so funny. You look at how you treated kettlebells and you're like, this is fun and is helping me. And then expand that out and it's like a bunch of people felt the same way and that you built a whole business around it. You look at pickleball, it's like that sport, the bar to competing is so low that everybody's going to have a blast like competing. Like, you play pickleball like once or twice and you're like, that was a good, like relative to tennis, which is an amazing sport, but it requires a degree of proficiency to even begin to have fun playing. Pickleball is not like that. I think there's a lot of different, it's interesting right now. Like I look at high rocks, like fitness racing, right? It's the bar to compete is really low. And therefore it's something that people really enjoy doing because people really enjoy competing, and most things that you're going to compete in actually have a much higher bar to do it. Running is having a pretty big resurgence right now. A lot of people are getting into distance running, discovering they can run marathons again. Like the bar to competing is really low. And when you find something like that and kind of just like pursue what you enjoy, and this is me kind of my read on what you're explaining, you pursue something you enjoy, you got to get lucky to some degree that other people are going to enjoy it well. But people are all relatively similar to some degree too. So it's like, okay, pursue what you enjoy and get really good at it and just lean into it. And you're just going to be in a place, it's more likely at least, you'll be in a place that you're doing something where other people are going to enjoy that as well. And then maybe you can start a business with it.
Totally. And
I love
sorry, John, go ahead.
Go ahead, Marcus. No, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think at the core of whatever I've done in the past, it's always come around to what's enjoyable to me, what's fun. Because if it's fun for me, like to your point, Dom, there's going to be a lot of other people that it's enjoyable to as well. Like I'm not the only person that thinks this way. So instead of thinking in terms of, okay, either A, there's competition, or B, there's too many people doing this one thing, or not enough people doing it, it's like, no, I'm really into this. What would I want? And that was kind of where I was with kettlebells at the time. I was like, okay, what is it that I would put out there for me from a year or two ago? And so now I'm at that place with pickleball where it's like, okay, a year or two ago, when I was starting to get into this, what would I want then? So then it just helps kind of guide me to find the right person and find the right product or program or whatever I want to put out, because then I know if I needed this a year ago, somebody needs this now. Or if I needed that before, somebody needs this thing and is going to absolutely benefit from this thing. And then for me, it's just, how do I keep playing? Like, to your point, it's super accessible. Everybody can do this. That is very much in line with kind of my vision of things and how to get people into movement and just, being able to have the freedom of movement that all of us are very interested in, which I think most of us, especially in this unconventional training world, that was like our guiding line. That was our North Star. How do we help people move better than they could ever do with machines or with fixed path type of movements? It doesn't make them better or worse. It was just, how can we expand on human movement? And that's kind of where I'm at now with this, where it's like, okay, I want people to be able to do the things that they couldn't do before. They typically, after a certain age, they don't sprint, they don't jump, they don't do any kind of lateral fast movements. And where pickleball is amazing is that because it's a smaller court, because it's much easier in terms of form. Like you don't have to have that same level of technique that you did with tennis. Now anybody, like I saw a couple guys on the other day that one guy was like, yeah, it's my first time running or doing anything like this in 6 years. He was like in his 50s. And it was so cool to see these two older guys just like running around the court like a couple of 10-year-olds. So it was so much fun. It brings back that youthfulness that we completely lose as we get older, as we stop training and moving that way. And that's where I see pickleball, where I'm just like having such a blast. And then it's like tapping into my competitive spirit again, where I'm playing with guys that are like way better than me, people who are going pro, people who are playing at like the highest level. And then now that's like, all right, how can I get a little bit better? How can I get a little better? So it's all about my discovery through this, my journey through this. How can I get better at this? And then how can I share this process to people who are probably going to go along this path as well?
I love the mindset that you touched on there is like, hey, let me look back a year. Let me look back 2 years. And I think this is something that's really important for the modern coach right now, especially one that's passionately pursuing their modality of choice, right? Whether it's kettlebells, whether it's mace, whatever the case is. And a lot of times I feel this is one of the things that we have to differentiate our personal practice and how creative we can be with the responsibility of reverse engineering that process to create a deliverable that makes that process accessible and safe and fun for the person who has not walked that same journey. You can't expect them to have that same level of technical proficiency. And that's what creates that bridge. Like you guys are talking about pickleball, but how many people have you got passionately pursuing moving a kettlebell and moving their body in more dynamic ways because you went really far and then you thought like, well, how do I make this an easy, fun, safe entry point for all these people who follow me on Instagram inspired by what they see, but I know they're not there yet and they need to guide, right? 2 years back, 5 years back. And how important and how difficult has it been, or has it been difficult at all to like take yourself out of present time and then like go through that process?
For sure, especially because we get ourselves into our own bubble. Like I'm here in my lab essentially, and like this is my bubble for the most part, where I am so inundated with the things that I do that I forget. Even when I train with people, it's like they're so not at that place yet. Or I train with the same type of people or talk to the same people, so I'm thinking primarily about like kettlebells and unconventional training. And then I go like right now I'm working with 24-hour fitness and talking with coaches who are brand new to training. It's like, okay, this is what I needed to kind of get out of this mindset of very, very niche, very, very specific into how can this actually benefit. Like even some of the videos I put out that are more educational, there's still a level of proficiency you need to have to be able to do those things. So it's like, how do we scale it back even further so that we can hit the right coach who's going to be able to actually use those things and take it to their clients so that we can actually help the masses. So that's where, it can definitely take like a second to, be aware and then step back from what I'm doing to be like, okay, what is the regular brand new coach? What do they need? And I don't even mean brand new like to training in general, brand new to this, where it's like, what do they need that's actually going to be useful? And then how do I light the steps along the way? So that way, because at the time for you and I, John, when we started, it was like to go from a swing to a snatch to flow, there were no bridges. It was like you just had to freaking jump and hope that you made land. Like there was no steps along the way, which is what I think you and I did a great job of with On It and for the On Academy and the workshops was how do we show so many pieces, so many regressions, progressions to actually help people get to that point. So it was definitely through work with you, work with people like you, where we were able to kind of create stuff like that and get out of like this super advanced flow crazy stuff and like bring it back to the regular coaches.
All right, one last question here before we wrap it up to piggyback off of that. That's an awesome story talking about your process of focusing down and how to add value. Is there anything right now, whether it's an overarching message that you'd like to give to an audience of coaches who are maybe in the earlier stages of their career, or is there something that you're noticing that people could and should be focused on? What's that final word of advice or those words of wisdom for the folks listening in?
I guess to the point I made earlier about creating something for myself a couple years ago. It's something. If there's something I would say to myself before, the one kind of guiding star that or guiding light that I've always kind of held to was, and I love this quote, I think it was Earl Nightingale. It's like the opposite of courage is not fear, it's conformity. And it's just trying to do what everybody else is doing. And like, it just makes you, it forces you to do something that you don't really want to do, but you think is like the safe way to do it. So it's, don't conform. Be yourself, truly be authentic to what you like and what you like to do, and be bold. Like, who cares what anybody thinks? Like, I would say that would probably be my biggest piece of advice right there. Do what you want to do. Do not worry about what people think. Everyone's going to have an opinion. There's always going to be, I talk to so many coaches that are like, I'm not really ready for this. I don't really want to put this out yet. It's like, listen, you're going to get pushback no matter what you do. So you might as well do the things you enjoy. You might as well have a blast doing them. Don't worry about that. Fortune favors the bold. So go do something fun, go do something exciting, and go do something that you really enjoy.
I mean, authenticity is a cliche. It's a trope until it's not, until you realize that is the only way that you're going to go succeed, especially as like a solopreneur, which is where most people fall in this space. So could not agree more. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you very much for the time. John, appreciate it as well. Yeah, gang, we did it.
Always love hanging.
Thanks, guys.